Good evening and welcome to After Hours. Joining us this evening is Jamie Lee Hamilton, who is a pretty well-known community activist. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Patrice. Good
It's
to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to see you. It's been a while.
Long time.
So when I was thinking about doing this, like you have a very strong, it seems to me a very strong tie to community and responsibility to community. Why do you think that is? Where does that come from in you?
Well, it comes from my early background through my parents. My mother was an Aboriginal activist, one of the co-founders of the Vancouver Indian Friendship Society, and my father was a union organizer. So, you know, that sense of justice and equality for all comes from there,
From
that
your
place.
youth.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So, because my next question was going to be, where did you grow up and who were your influences?
I grew up in Strathcona. I attended Strathcona Elementary and Britannia High School. And I always think my greatest influence was my mother. She was also my strongest supporter as well as I aged and went through
All the changes.
All the changes. Yeah.
And you seem to you also have an attachment for the rights of sex workers. How did that attachment get there?
Well, you know, I came from the street. I wound up on the street at a young age. You know, my family had been thrown into poverty, and I wound up there. And so that's where I connected with community as well, a broader community outside of my family, and developed. I like to say I went on my gender odyssey and found myself, and of course, you know, I was connected with other young sex workers, and so that's a lifelong connection, and always will be. And then, you know, I was involved in the early '80s. There was a battle on to rid the West End of sex workers, of which I was one. And so we were going to battle against people who had moved into the neighborhood. Surprisingly, a lot of middle-class white gay men who wanted to, they didn't like the idea of hookers in their neighborhood, even though we were in the commercial area and plying our trade. And so we had a big battle. It culminated in 1984 injunction mass evicting us from the West End. And so I went back to school at that time, and you know, because I had been a high school dropout. And so then in 1991, I was doing walkabouts with the United Church minister, Reverend Barry Morris, and bringing hot apple cider or coffee to women in the downtown east side that were on the street. And there was a horrible murder at that time, a First Nations woman, and who had a couple very young children, and she was brutally murdered. And that just reinitiated my passion to find solutions to make sex workers safe.
So you say you started on the streets as a young person. How has that changed? And how has it changed?
Well, it's become a lot more vicious. It's in terms of, you know, back in the 70s and 80s, we were very much a community. One could even say part of a cultural group. And we hung out together. We took our coffee breaks together. I look at the Davy Days as a outdoor brothel. If any pimps came down to the stroll, we would kick them off and say, you know, if you want to work out here, if you want to participate in life out here, you go home and throw a dress on and come and suck like the rest of us. Right? Not sure if I can say that on TV, but
no, that's the reality.
That's the reality. And yeah, and so But after the 84 injunction, we were dispersed, and so we lost our sense of belonging, of community. We were thrown into dark, deserted industrial areas, and from that moment, previous to 84, there had been maybe 1 or 2 sex worker murders, and all of a sudden, after 84, there were initially 3 sex workers in the industrial area of Mount Pleasant where we were moved to that were murdered, and then in the downtown east side, there were more sex, and it just kept climbing. And
the numbers are very high, actually, have been very high.
Very high, and that could have been prevented. That didn't need to happen, but when you place women in dark, deserted industrial areas with little support, you know, you're essentially having the effect of inviting crazed out predators to come down, and you know, I call it the killing fields that the state created, the killing fields.
It's sort of it's almost like as a society we don't care about those women, about the women who are sex workers. It's like we've put them aside, somehow they're not important.
Absolutely. Women were treated as disposable and throwaways, and that's not acceptable.
How do you feel about young people being on the streets? Young women starting out. You know what? First of all, I want to talk to you about, because when we say sex workers, I tend to think of women. And is there a connection between women who are sex workers and the men that may be sex workers, or the young people who are sex workers? Talk a bit about that.
Well, certainly in the 70s and 80s, we all worked the stroll together. Male prostitutes who were known as hustlers, and female sex workers and transgender sex workers, and we were all part of the same community. We looked after each other. If someone went missing, we would round everybody up, and we'd be a posse, you know, going to, you know, the different spots. Just
where people go.
Where people go, and so it primarily prostitution does involve women, but there's still a strong segment that are male sex workers and transgender sex workers.
And are the...
And I'm talking adults, I'm not.
Yeah.
There are juvenile prostitutes, but you know, they're being exploited. They're, like, I don't even consider that sex work.
And how do you feel about that? I saw a documentary actually the other night on Knowledge Network, and it was looking at places around the world, Cambodia, Turkey, and the young girls that are sold, bought and sold, and that whole, and trying to change their lives and all that. And if women are marginalized who are sex workers, does that make it easier for exploitation of young people?
Yeah, the criminalization aspect of criminalizing the sex trade pushes things underground, and that includes then young children, as you talk about, are pushed underground, and they're exploited and commodified, and that's totally wrong and unacceptable. And I think police resources should be put into place to capture those who are involved in trafficking, human trafficking, and exploiting minors.
Like, there's always been a contradiction in this country because, in fact, prostitution is legal, but it's always been everything surrounding it and that is illegal. And I want you to talk a bit about sort of the historically, because you talk about the West End, but there were other things like women were being for communication, for, okay, talk a bit about that.
Well, the communicating law came into effect. Parliament brought that law in to try to address the issue of the sex trade and the nuisance factor, the street level, but it created this untold harm, and that's the recent Bedford decision. The 9 Supreme Court of Canada justices agreed that the law, as it stands, had created this harm, and
women were being arrested, like
absolutely.
Arrested, going to jail, out, arrested.
Yeah, you know, I was involved in the Davie West End Village days. we were given, I think it was in 1981 or 82, the NDP Premier Mike Harcourt had just become the mayor of Vancouver, and he didn't campaign on this, but when he became mayor, he propelled, it was called the Street Activities Bylaw, and that began fining sex workers $2,000. Just, you know, you didn't even have a court case. You were just, if you were on the street, the police would come along and $2,000 fines according to the Street Activities Bylaw. And I know I got caught up in that. And so all of a sudden, you know, you're going out on the street every night, you know, and having to do these free services to pay that damn fine off. And, you know, in the first 6 months of existence of the Street Activities Bylaw, they collected $30,000, $28,000 off of sex workers. That was a lot of money in those days. And,
Hey, it's a lot of money now.
Yeah.
And then, never mind that, just makes the fact that women have to work more, sex workers have to
Absolutely.
work more.
Absolutely, and then all of a sudden you're having to go into cars to turn customers, and you know you're trying to get away from the prying eyes of the police, which you know creates all that the unsafe conditions.
Is there still a bad trick sheet?
Yes, there is a bad date sheet, but we call it the red light alert now. And,
Talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I was one of them that was responsible for the creation of that because I didn't like the name Bad Date. It implied that sex workers were going out on a date, and we weren't. And so the red light alert, you know, we always, red light is sort of synonymous with, you know, prostitution. So it was a way to get out to, you know, those involved in the sex trade to be aware of these potential dangerous men that are out there, predators.
And how does the red alert work? Like women tell you about it, it's sort of,
Yeah,
how does
it's
that work?
transmitted to different organizations. So there's one organization that takes responsibility for getting it out there, and it's distributed, you know, by paper or else online as well. And so it comes out frequently, and so, you know, you can check things out when you're out there on the street. The MAP van, which is called the Mobile Access Project, it's a van that travels the strolls and
Talk a bit
provides
about that.
condoms and lube and things like that, and the red light alert. So it's a outreach van to that help
people who are working.
that are isolated and working in dark areas and dangerous situations.
Now, I think a lot of people would tend to see sex workers as victims, and not to say that there isn't that aspect to that way of living. But is that all that it is?
No, I think that, you know, when we look at prostitution, sex industry, we have to look at it in a spectrum. It's, you know, we see the poor, drug-addicted women in the downtown east side, they're at one end of the spectrum, and then we have these other women who may be university students that are working in high-end escort massage parlors. So, and then there's, you know, different, along that continuum, there's many others. You know, there could be the single mom that's just a part-time or maybe coming out a few days a month to, you know, make ends meet, and
Or maybe going to school or
Going to
university or whatever.
yeah. I can tell you at the universities in this city, there's quite an active sex trade on campuses. So
There you go.
there you go. But we need to always ensure that the women that are trapped in prostitution, you know, the women who are maybe drug addicted and living in extreme poverty, we got to have the resources to help them, lift them out if that's what they want. But there are many others that, you know, claim sex work to be a choice, and we must respect their right to engage in a profession that they see as a choice, and support them and keep them out of harm's way. So, but there's a lot of groups out there. There's a campaign on right now called We Are Not Your Rescue Project that these groups target all women in the sex trade, say every woman is prostituted, therefore a victim, and they're going to rescue everyone and create this utopia for them. And that's just stupidness, right?
Well, how are they going to do that? Because it might take things like, well, first of all, you do have to have money. You have to have good housing. If you want to go to school, again, you have to have money. You have to have access to doing that, and it becomes something that should be happening anyways, never mind for a particular group, but for everybody, right?
Yeah. And what are they going to do? Offer them at a crappy job at McDonald's? Probably there's even more exploitation going on there than in the sex trade. So, if you can't offer real solutions, don't even attempt. But a lot of these groups are rescue organizations, and they get big money from governments that want to be perceived that they're doing something for the poor victims. Right?
I've never understood how it is, because there are escort services, and I've never understood how it can be that some of the women working on the streets were getting arrested and all continual unfairness, and yet escort services can run, but it's not like escort services.
No.
Talk about
it. When you're getting paid $300 for a coffee, that's not a date. That's something more involved, right? And so I used to say that if you worked in an escort service and the operators were paying what's called hush money, so they were being licensed and so forth by the city, whereas the poor lower level, street level sex workers were the ones being targeted and by the police. Most of the criminalized charges were always leveled at the street level sex workers, primarily women, and a lot of Aboriginal women too. So, the unfairness of that just, here's the city obtaining lucrative licensing fees from licensing places of prostitution, and yet someone like me that set up Grandma's house and allowed women to come there safely then is charged with keeping a common body house. Well, Patrice, there was
Doesn't
nothing,
add up.
No, and there was nothing common about us, it was, and so every 4 or 5 star hotel in this city, if you want to look at it that way, it's a common body house, but at least our service was providing real resources to women.
Like really grassroots on the street.
Yeah.
So it's been decades of discrimination for sex workers.
Yes.
How did you feel about the Supreme Court decision? Talk a bit about what it was and how did you feel about it?
Yeah, the Supreme Court decision was the Bedford decision. 3 sex workers brought a constitutional challenge to the prostitution laws. And, Grandma's house here in Vancouver, which I had founded, was central in a lot of the arguments at the Supreme Court of Canada. And the justices agreed that, the laws as they currently stand have created this untold harm and placed sex workers in dangerous conditions, that they're not allowed to maybe have a receptionist or a driver or bodyguard, or they can't work in pairs together in an indoor place, because that would, that would be a body house. And so, the Supreme Court justices, God bless them, throughout the laws, and says these laws impede on the rights to
and that's an amazing thing, I think.
Absolutely.
I mean, but they had to do that, though.
Absolutely.
It's almost like,
And
it's
to get-
amazing, but they had to.
And to get 9 justices all agreeing together, it's a unanimous ruling, so thank God, you know. But now we're in this place where the conservatives are doing this consultation online, you know, in 28 days, and they want to hear from the public what they feel the public thinks
Would like to see happen.
would like. But you know, the fix is in. We already know that the government, conservative government, wants to bring in what's called the Swedish Nordic model, which it criminalizes the male customers, and
But then that just does the same thing,
It
only
does.
on the opposite.
exactly,
side.
exactly, and we're going to be in the same situation that we were in when the Picton stuff occurred. So it's going to place women. We know from where Sweden was the last place to adopt this law, and sex trafficking has dramatically increased. Women have been, there's a lot more increase of dangerous predators out there, and you know, because the women are still out there. They have to be. It hasn't eradicated prostitution. And the ones that are free from violence are the ones that have moved indoors. But it hasn't done anything to address safety for the women who are the most vulnerable. And
What would you like to see? I'm sure the women will participate, hopefully, in campaigning the government themselves and the other sex workers, male sex workers. But what would you like? Like, what would you like to see as at least first steps?
I'd like to see the government embark on a proper consultation. The way that it's set forth, there's going to be a lot of abuses of it. You know, church groups can, you know, just have their whole congregation send in tons of responses. You know, and
Oh,
it's
yeah, I
going to
see
be
what you're saying.
it's going to be that consultation that they're embarking on. It's going to be based on morality, and you know, we don't get anywhere when you start to look at policies from a moral perspective. And so of course, I've always been in favor. New Zealand, which is based on British parliamentary system, as we are, they enacted legislation that decriminalized the sex trade. It allowed women to work cooperatively, collectively, in small groups, 4 to 5. They had to be New Zealand residents, so that eliminated any trafficking aspect out of the equation. They had to be adults. They had to have health checks, and that was implemented for 5 years, and it was just renewed. The legislation was just renewed because it's eliminated violence. It's working. It's
I was going to ask about cooperative houses or some kind of form of that kind of business, a cooperative business.
Yes. Yeah. No, so that's good. And so, you know, there's many of us pushing for that New Zealand model, but we don't think the government's going to go there. And
We'll see.
well, they were bad on the same-sex stuff. I don't hold any promises for them on this.
So how long, but because of the Supreme Court decision, now can people start doing some different things?
Well, I
than they
think
might
people have
before?
been, ever since the Picton scenario. You know, certainly I know I opened a private club, social club, membership-based, and with a city-issued license. I, you know, had to go through a very stringent process to get my license. You know, fire officials had to sign off on it, police department had to sign off on it, the city, 3 different departments of the city had to sign off on it. And it's a place that different lifestyles can come, meet each other, you know, and it also allows sex workers as well, if they want to meet their clients there, they can, because so they can then you know, determine whether that's a safe situation for them. And we welcome everyone at our club. It's called Forbidden City, and
Talk a bit more about it, because it was sort of next coming. We only have a couple minutes, so talk a bit about that. And so now do you feel safe with the Supreme Court decision that this kind of thing could happen more?
Yeah, I think at Forbidden City it's a very good model. I've had politicians in to see the space, talk to customers, talk to sex workers. The police have been supportive. They haven't, supported us in creating a facility that was safe. So there's a
like physically
physically, structurally, you know, and that's good. And I know they put us on a priority 1 if there's ever any problem, which there hasn't been in 5.5 years, but if there was, that we're priority 1 and they would dispatch immediately. And so, you know.
Is it like a house? Is it, what is?
We're located in a
Or
commercial.
does it feel like a house? Okay.
Well, I think it's lots of reds and golds. And it's in a commercial building, in a commercial location on Kingsway. And so, you know, nice overstuffed couches, and we have little rooms, private rooms. We have a little small, intimate adult theater, you know, so we've...
Oh, that sounds interesting. So people can come there?
Yes.
Can people help in any way, could people contact you and
Oh, certainly.
get information?
Yeah,
whatever?
we have a website, and I'm sure it's going to come up on your screen, forbiddencityvan.com. You know, we have different groups that come and use the space as well, and you know, we have an Asian group helping women in sex trade. They provide all the condoms and lube and through Coastal Health. And yeah, so it's just, you know, if anybody wants to get in touch, you know, contact the website, you know, the phone number's on there, and be happy to talk to them.
Nice to see you.
You too, Patrice.
Yeah, really nice.
Good.
And I think when I heard the Supreme Court decision, I felt like after all these decades, maybe something new will happen. That's good.
Let's hope. Let's hope.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
I hope so.
I do too.
And I hope